episode of Debt Nation, where we are busy putting death out of business. And I tell you what, Arvin, he came on here. He's great. We're going to do seasteading. We're going to do a bunch of other shows. But we did a show on depression and how transhumanism can solve and sort out depression. Now, depression was a really big, bad, psychiatric, mental disorder, a mental disease, a big problem in the mental health space. And we want it gone, okay? Because if you want a healthy, prosperous population that can be orientated to learning about the universe, learning about the beauty of life, learning about all the amazing things that life has to offer, you can't be depressed, okay? This is a huge issue. And mental health problems are really, really big in rich, developed societies, in poor societies. It's the great equalizer. Thomas O'Carroll, you come from the most depressing nation in the world, the UK. No, I'm just kidding.
It really is at the moment. We have got mass floods at the moment whilst you've got fires.
Rains all the time, Brexit, you had to put up with... No, I'm just kidding. But look, it's really good to have you on, Thomas. I can make fun of the UK because that's, we're down in Australia, your prison colony down here, and we got the better end of the deal on the weather stuff. But I'll tell you that.
Got it. History-wise, you didn't have it, but yeah, we've got it now.
Yeah. No, I'm allowed. I've got an official card that says I can make fun of the UK, and it's all good. No, it's really good to have you here, Thomas. It's really, really good. I've seen you in the comments. You're a big fan of the show, and you finally come on to give us your wisdom on this stuff. Mental health is a serious topic. It's a really important topic, and we're really happy to have you on. So just before we rock in, because Ben Zion's also joining us here. He's coming in from the United States. He's gone blue right now, but he's coming in from the United States, where he's going to give us his rundown on the Futurist New Deal and the mental health side and his stuff. But Thomas, who are you? You're joining us from the UK. Thank you so much for staying up late to do this show with us.
Don't worry.
And so Thomas, welcome to the show.
So in 2011, 2012, I had, it's gone blue again. I had a mental health breakdown. So I actually was a drug addict at the time. And I ended up getting what's called drug-related psychosis. So my brain basically mucked up. It stopped making there's a gland inside your head which makes a chemical which helps you perceive reality around you. So it takes the visual, the physical, every sort of sense that you have, and puts them all together and helps you recognize what's going on around you. It's gone blue again. So with that, what it does is it actually, you start to see, feel, you start to perceive the reality around you as breaking down because you don't have all of the information that's correct. And because of that, you lose control, you lose focus, your life begins to break down because you haven't got those things around you. And since then, I've come out of it. I went through the mental health. Thank God for the NHS that we have. I've gone through that whole process and I've recovered. I've come out, and we're now at the point where I'm trying to help as many people who are going through a similar situation as possible.
So you've turned evangelical on the issue, and that's really important. That's a sign of mental clarity when you can turn around and say, I've been there, I've done that, and I'm going to turn around and assist people with that. It's the drugs, the drug-induced ones are the worst. I mean, if you're born with it, I guess that's one thing, but drugs are somewhat avoidable depending on social scenarios and the scenarios of life, and also drugs are definitionally, alcohol is a drug, tobacco is a drug, and these are gateways to harder drugs. But these are also depressants in their own way, and can lead to larger systemic problems. And the UK has a drinking culture. So it doesn't really matter, and also it has this pill popping culture within the club scene. If you go into London or whatever, the drug abuse is quite bad, notwithstanding the opium problem there in the United States, Benzone 2020. But also, you've got the pharmaceutical problem there in the UK as well. Lots and lots of pharmaceutical abuse. I don't want to go too much into it, but there's of what you had to, however that happened. But what do you see as in the UK? What's the gateway? Is there a pharmaceutical? Is the mental health coming from the pharmaceutical? Is it coming from the drinking culture? Is it coming from illegal opioids? What do you is it a mix?
It is a mix. So for myself personally, I was actually in the club industry. I was a manager of a nightclub, and basically it was the way I got through it. So I was smoking around £20 worth of cannabis a day. I was doing lines of cocaine. I was doing many, many different drugs just to try and push myself through. And basically, it finally got to a point where it was during a recession, so we were struggling to get by. Most bars and clubs were dying out at the time. And yeah, it finally got to the point where I snapped. And that happens for a lot of people out there. A lot of people usually have that same thing with the drug situation. But when it comes to mental health, it's more to do with a PTSD effect, like a trauma effect that seems to affect someone to a point where they finally break and they snap and they can't go anymore, and their brain just shuts down certain systems.
Benzone 2020, you're an optimist, and you're one of the most mentally fit people that I know, and you're running for president of the United States. You got a lot of problems there in the United States. On the opioids issue, which Trump has made a big deal out of, he thinks that building a wall is going to, help assist with knocking us out. Mental health investments by governments around the world. Actually, it was a huge issue here in Australia, massive. The federal government argued back and forth over larger and larger and larger allotments of money towards fixing and addressing mental health issues. Just open up for us on if you've had any personal experiences with mental health, and then your policy options towards that, and then we're going to go into Ninja Theory, Insight Project, Hellblade. We're going to talk about that stuff. But firstly, open up on your Benzone 2020 Futurist New Deal sort of mental health idea and transhumanism, or whatever you want to talk about, Ben. Welcome to the show, Ben. Always good to see you.
Yes. Thank you for having me back. You look very familiar. Have we met before?
I think we've met once or twice.
Yes. It's good to be here live and in person, so to speak, and talking about this most important subjects. And you mentioned that there's a constant push and pull with the decisions at the national level about expenditures for mental health. And my feeling is that until we start to move into a framework where we're able to work past the very serious limitations of present-day psychiatric medication, that push and pull is probably more or less well-deserved. We need to be having these kinds of conversations. I approached a few friends, people who have some moderate to high degree of expertise in the area of emerging technology and interfaces, and said, we're doing this show about mental health interfaces. We'd really like to have your insights. And they felt like they might be being dragged to church. They felt like there might be too much moralizing, maybe something hitting a little too close to home. So a couple of people bowed out of this panel, I'm sad to say. But this sensitivity is understandable. And this sensitivity on the parts of institutions is understandable. And it's why we need to support initiatives like that undertaken by the Ninja Theory company for this Insight project. This is a project that is grand in scope. We could describe this as a DARPA or Google Labs level project. That's unfortunately doesn't have that amount of funding. And I think that it itself is reason enough to do this show and ask people to watch and support this undertaking, because this is a crucial question for the prospects for the human race surviving and thriving in the 21st century, is finding better ways. That psychiatric medicine that we mentioned, it is not perfect. These medications that are used, they have this is often a situation of taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So for people who have very, very serious concerns, like they cannot function because of schizophrenia, this medication is absolutely necessary. But for a lot of people with concerns of a lower grade, the answer of taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back is not a perfect answer. And so we need to explore these things which have less serious drawbacks, and advanced algorithms and interfaces, I do believe, are the solution for the 21st century. To answer your first question, yes, I have had some experience in this area.
All right, Thomas. So can you lay out the map for us? Can you be the cartographer? Can you lay out what is Ninja Theory, and then what is the project, the Insight Project, and what is Hellblade, and how does it all work together, and what are they trying to achieve? Can you shine a torch, a light in this dark place, and show us the light?
Well, I'll definitely try. So basically, you've got a company which is based in the games industry called Ninja Theory. They are most famous probably for the Devil May Cry games. Now, what they've done is they've released a game which was designed around designed around, I literally just said it, psychosis. And they've designed all the mechanics within the game. They've made the character, the main character, meant to have psychosis, so that they can actually guide their way through the storyline and the gameplay in that way, so that it simulates and tries to get across the perception. They actually won a BAFTA for this game. It's called, as I say, it's Hellblade. And they've done so fantastically at actually getting it so it's understood, so that people can actually have a look at that and go, wow, now I actually understand my cousin who had psychosis or anything like that. From that, they've actually literally just released a follow-up to that game, which is called Siena's Hellblade 2. They've literally just done the promo trailer for it. And they've also started the Insight Project. So the Insight Project is looking into ways of creating therapies for mental health, so that people are using technology from the gameplay. So, for instance, if you've got DID or something like that. So DID is dissociative identity disorder. Imagine being able to put a headset on and being able to actually see that inner world where you've got your different personalities all there, and you can interact a lot more easily with them. You could also have wearable devices where you're actually monitoring your heart rate, or you're monitoring the stress levels that you're going through, and you can increase and decrease those fears that are actually inside you whilst in a virtual space. These are the kind of things that they're looking at and trying to understand using neuroscience, using the games industry's technologies, and really just trying to put it all together and focus it to help many people who are suffering from it.
So Thomas, before the game, it was very hard for people to sort of visualize what this mental health disorders sort of looked like, sort of felt like, sort of characterized like. And then after this game, there was a lot of praise from people with various mental disorders, saying that this was a good exhibit, a good way to explain,
to actually understand it,
understand it from an external perspective. Do you want to talk about that for a little bit?
Yeah. So if I relate it to my own experience, one of the things that I had was that I felt that there was mechanical parts within inside me, and that there was the government talking to me via different technologies. And basically, I actually had one episode where I could feel this micro, whatever it was inside, just slowly crawling down and slowly taking out parts of my body. And I could literally physically feel that. And even though I know it wasn't true, and it was an amalgamation of different thought processes that were going on in my head, it felt real to me. And the game has created mechanics which can get that over to you. So the voice that was telling me what this thing was doing, they've managed to use that in the game mechanics to show as almost like a way of knowing if an enemy's behind you or not. But at the same time, that voice could be lying. It could be actually telling the truth. So it's adds a bit of tension, bit of trust and distrust to that voice that's behind you in the game.
Wow, that's incredible. I know when you go into the amphetamines area, the coke bugs, the amphetamites, these guys when they take these drugs, they say they feel like they have bugs crawling under their skin. I also, if you want to go to another one, visualization. If you watch that movie, The Island, about the cloning. The corporation that's conducting the cloning. I remember in one scene in there, the scientist, he inserts a bunch of larger than nanobites, but some sort of robot observers into the eyes, and that would be creepy to feel. I mean, in reality, that would be creepy, but to actually just visualize that. Did you see, Thomas, the conversation that I had with Dr. Duncan and Ben Zion 2020, and I had with Dr. Duncan? Did you see that?
I did watch that, and there's a couple of things that I actually want to speak about.
Yeah, can I have your analysis on that? Is that okay with you, Ben Zion?
So there was one.
Please. That was an incredible show.
There was one comment in particular that stuck with me, and that was something Dr. Duncan said was, you wouldn't want to be inside an artificial mind when you're in the singularity, along with someone who had a mental illness. Now, for me, that's stigmatization, because I've gone through a mental illness. I've repaired myself. I've managed to get through all of it, and to have that hope of getting to somewhere like a singularity, where you're inside a hive mind almost, or to have that hope of getting into space. It's one of the things that actually gets people out of mental illness and actually draws them further through and helps them get through it. And it's when you hear things like that, it kind of puts that you're taking away the hope, you're taking away that need to repair themselves and to really get going again.
Am I hearing you correctly, or am I reading between the lines too much when you're saying that something like the singularity is a substitute for religion, a hope mechanism?
In a way, yeah. So, I mean, there's so many different aspects for replacing religion. So when you say that, again, yeah, it gives you somewhere to go to. It gives you a target. You've read a bit in between the lines, but I can completely understand where you're coming from. And yeah, it kind of is. I don't think religion really ever helped with mental illness before. I think it's probably made it worse. I mean, if you look at some of the texts, you're looking at a guy talking to a burning bush in a field somewhere and hearing the voice of God. That could be seen as it was a psychotic episode that he was having. But I wouldn't put it down to that. I wouldn't focus it as a replacement for religion, because, as I said again, with the getting into space or anything like that, you're pushing it in that way as well.
Ben Zion 2020, you were here with Dr. Duncan. What did you make of that conversation? And what do you think? What do you think? What do you think about the singularity? Would you like to be locked up in the singularity with someone with a mental disorder, or do you think that's also stigmatization? What do you think?
I think his point is well taken on a certain level. So, for example, I was at an event some weeks back. There was a presenter. I did have a chance to present at this Princeton conference. We did a follow-up with that. But there was a presenter named Phil Torres, and he described some people who were human extinctionists. They believe that humanity is not so great, and they think that steps should be taken to remove humanity from the face of the earth. And he described not one, but two life scientists, aspiring biologists of his acquaintance, who were interested in bioengineering a pathogen that would affect the fertility rate of human beings to that end. I don't think that these are good people. I would not want to share a brain-computer interface of an advanced kind with those people. I would be concerned that their psychosis might infect me. So his point is well taken that there might be certain situations where you would want to limit contact with certain kinds of folks. This is true in history. There are demagogues who we might, looking back, wish had never been born. This is not something that is purely a 21st century problem. However, I do think that by and large, this concern about wanting to limit contact with people, this would be mediated by the technology far more than it would present a risk, as Mr. O'Carroll has suggested. And I think that more to the point, problems of this kind are largely economic problems. We've seen a dramatic reduction in human misery in the last 30 years. That was how we ended the last show. This is coincides with a dramatic increase in world gross domestic product, and we'll continue to see benefits of this kind deriving from greater and greater providence. So by and large, my feeling is that we should not worry too much about the idea of sharing headspace with troubled people. I think that some of those concerns are already increasingly a thing of the past, but we do need to be on the lookout for some sort of troubling memes of this kind in the future as well.
All right, just walking back a little bit, going back to Ninja Theory and Hellblade and the Insight Project. Thomas, tell us, this is kind of the doorway, right? Technology has been advancing quite rapidly, very rapidly, in fact. The gaming industry is probably the quickest growing industry in the whole world at some point. At least it was, but it boomed from a $0 industry to a multi-hundred billion, if not on its way to a multi-trillion-dollar industry in the coming decades. This sort of mental health approach where there's an educational side, so that people who aren't subject to the tyranny of these psychiatric problems can understand a little bit better, and there's also sort of a prosthetic or a mental awareness, not a mental a repair mechanism built in there a little bit, right? So once this door was unlocked, what are we talking about here? We're talking about paradigm shift in mental health?
I believe so. So the brain does have plasticity. So it does actually repair itself, and it does, that's why you can manage to get young children who have got half a brain where they've had brain surgery. And it repairs itself, and they're still fully functioning adults. What the problem is most mental health is where you get a misfiring of neurons, and it's actually mapping the brain for why that's happening is the main problem that we seem to have. So you can't ethically get someone to go through a mental illness and then actually be able to map that into a space where you can tell where the neurons were firing during that actual period of time. So it's a bit of a balancing act. If we can manage to get the technologies using the stuff that's come out of the gaming industry to be able to map this and get it exact so that we know exactly where we are. Obviously, there would be the problem of things like neuroweapons, which have been discussed a good few times. Now, I personally think that we need to lean into these technologies to come up with altering something to sort of block that along the way. You can't block something if you don't know enough about it. So it's kind of one of those things that, I think it is paradigm shifting. I do think it will make a massive change to mental health and to the way that we can actually resolve the problems for so many people who are suffering. I mean, it's 1 in 4 people suffer from a mental illness, whether that's depression, whether that's schizophrenia, whether it's psychosis. It's around. It's really quite hard to understand how important it actually is.
And it's about 90% of politicians and about 99.9% of bankers, I hear. No, I'm just kidding. All right, but yeah, no, this is a really important.
And policy wonks excluded.
All right, I shouldn't joke, but bank is a good target, and you've got. I mean, you're in the city of you know the city of London. It is true. It's true. All right, no, but because the brain is a very complicated machine. I mean, the most complicated machine in the known universe. It's far more complex than any quantum computer is, that we have, or any computer system. We invented the computer system, so that by default it makes us more complex than that system. Even if that system can outperform us on specific levels, that sort of holds true. I mean, Australopithecus, our great ancestor, is he more complex than us because somehow, you know what I mean? There is an argument there, but I think even over time, I think we will retain this complexity up here. And the point about mental illness and the interesting thing is, you know, you have a skull and there's a massive jelly in there, and it's very hard to visualize what's going on. I mean, what is happening in that head of theirs? And you know, something like Hellblade. You've played the game, yeah?
Yeah, I have played it.
And can you take us through an analysis of the characters, the story line, the arc, the theme, some of the landscapes, the visualizations, the music, the composure? Can you take us through what this game actually is, how it envisions, and how it explains the tortured mind? Because I would like to know. I would love to play this game. I'm going to play it, and AS Dex as well for transhumanists out there. But if this is a game for realizing this, it would be very interesting to know how they exhibit the themes of these minds.
So if you look at the game mechanics itself, if you have a voice going behind you and it's saying, "Turn around," you know that there's an enemy behind you. But if every now and then that voice is telling you, "Turn around," and there's nothing behind you, that's mimicking a part of psychosis. The way that you progress through levels, you're puzzle solving. So you're putting together things that don't usually connect and make sense. So you're constantly looking for things to connect when they don't really connect, whether it's symbols that are appearing and disappearing, or whether it's a bridge that actually isn't really there, and things like that. The main characters, you've got I can't even pronounce the name. The main character is a Celtic woman who is built upon this warrior, who's meant to be this sort of warrior spirit. She's lost her husband. She's going through a traumatic period of time, and she's trying to constantly find him and find her rock and lose the fear that is actually following her constantly throughout the game.
Wow. And is it a VR game, or is it a controller-based game?
It is a console. It's an Xbox game. So the game Hellblade is, I believe it's on PlayStation and Xbox. and you can now get the new one, Hellblade 2, is coming out with the new Xbox.
Fantastic,
It's
fantastic
also
to hear.
available on Windows. Hellblade send you a second.
Fantastic.
And Hellblade 2, yeah.
Fantastic, and I'm sure that as it advances, you're going to get more and more interactivity. I'm sure it'll go into the VR space with the gloves and everything. I'm sure that they will make it as interactive as possible. I'd like this notion about voices, because the thing about voices is that, well, there's foreign voice syndrome, but that's very, very rare. But the thing about voices is that, like, if the government was really broadcasting like a voice into your head, how do they always get your language correct? That's what I always wondered. What if you could speak Spanish, or what if you could speak, I don't know, Mandarin or whatever? Like, how do they always know that your mother tongue?
That goes back to the concept of, do you dream in your mother tongue? Language is conceptual in a sense. So yeah, I don't believe that I've ever had someone, at the time I probably would have considered myself a TI or a target individual. I was fortunate enough not to run into anyone who actually is a targeted individual at the time, because otherwise I probably would have spiraled down a rabbit hole. The problem I found, especially when I went into the mental health institutes that we have, was that I began to feed off of other people's mental health issues, because you are trying to fill these gaps. You're trying to. We are a pattern-seeking animal, and we have this visualization of what the world is around us. And when you're trying to fill in gaps, you're taking them from everything around you to try and fill those gaps to understand everything. And when someone is, setting fire to the curtains, that suddenly becomes, well, maybe that person is so that was an incident I had in the hospital. So when someone's trying to set fire to the curtains in the hospital, maybe that person then becomes a representative of another entity within your life, and you start again trying to find this almost religious aspect to it.
Wow, fantastic! Yeah, well, we learned that at university and in strategic policy and stuff, where you feed a certain level of disinformation to the public. It's a certain level of disinformation and symbolism out to the public, so that confused minds integrate this mechanism of creating links where links don't exist. A lot of governments are alphabet departments, and like the Department of Social Security or something. It's not that sinister on its own, but in a confused mind, it could sound like it's linked to all the other departments of or whatever, and it becomes a confusing mess. Something very simple does. And then if you get some of these big loudmouths on the radio, Alex Jones type, or the other types of predator commentators that are out there, who deliberately abuse this mechanism to target these minds to build a base, then you can end up with quite destructive, quite a mentally ill culture. And I feel like in America, this is quite a systemic problem. Ben Zion, do you find that this is a bit of a problem in the United States, where there is a little bit of a confused culture on this level?
Yes, it's a very serious problem, and and it's been something. It was a distinct pivot from the period of the 1970s to the 80s, 90s, and so on, where we saw certain features of what we call economic liberalization, privatization, and things of this kind in specific disciplines and specific features of the marketplace, namely across the radio waves and across the television bandwidth. And this has had a negative impact on people's mental health. There's a very real sense in which had this right-wing radio and Fox News had not been able to thrive, quote unquote thrive, in the way that it has over these many decades, that the United States would be a healthier place economically and otherwise. And this is something that many Americans are hesitant to point out, but I would say it every day and twice on Sundays. This is a serious issue, and we should also say that there are certain benefits that have derived from some of that privatization to a high degree. Some of the kinds of initiatives that we have often extolled on this very show have derived pretty directly from those same kind of privatization mechanisms. But generally speaking, just like the psychiatric medicine that we described as being 2 steps forward, 1 step back, there's better ways to handle this kind of things. And this is something that Americans should recognize, and I thank you for pointing it out, Steele. And I do enjoy talking about how policy matters or sociopolitical dynamics are affected by this sort of thing, and how one particular game can be of interest. I understand that Ninja Theory has a mandate to continue to make games that are this nuanced, but I got the impression that they also had a mandate to create not only games, but also interfaces that would be of use. Is that something that we can talk about at this time?
Yeah, Thomas, do you want to enlighten us on future advances in this way?
So what they're looking at is ways of creating interface such as, for instance, managing your heart rate during a game itself. So this interface will manage your heart rate, look at your heart rate, realize if you're getting fearful of something, and it will bring the tone down, or it will bring it up to help you manage if that is, say for instance, you're suffering from a fear-based problem, and you're afraid of spiders. So in the game, you'll have spiders constantly coming at you, and it will measure a rate of fear and tell you, right, okay, this is where you're about to have a problem. This is where you're about to break. This is where you're about to get into the mental registration. So we'll give you this band. If your heart rate gets to this rate, we know that you're going to go into a fear-based state. So they'll be able to work out a therapy for you later on using things like Fitbits and the such.
It's interesting that, because the UK is not built off a culture of fear as much as the US is. The US, there is more of an advantage to keep people locked down in a culture of fear. It's a larger country. It's a more dynamic country. There's geographic strains and demographic strains which kind of want to pull that country apart. The UK, apart from Northern Ireland or somewhere, I mean, you don't really have that culture of fear so much embedded into this.
We do in the main cities. So if you look at, for instance, we recently just had a terrorist attack in London where they were quite famous because of the Narwhal horn guy who fought off the terrorist with knives strapped to him. Now, what a lot of people don't know is that was actually at a criminology seminar. So the guy was actually invited along to show how well he was doing on getting out and about it back into the world. One of the guys who actually subdued him and managed to help the police take him down was actually a criminal from in there who was actually a murderer. So it shows you that the psychology and actually bringing out those aspects are so important, because it can go one way or the other. It can either go to the point where they stopped doing what they were doing before and they begin helping people, or it can go the other way and they can pretend that they're getting better just to get out and try and martyr themselves again. It's such a delicate subject, and we are fear-based in London since we have had so many terrorist attacks in London. We've had terrorist attacks in Birmingham. We have had across the country, really. And to say that we don't have as much fear as the US, I think.
Is it pushed across? Is it pushed across the media a lot? A fear-based culture? Like, do you wake up in the morning and they're yelling at each other, saying, "Is it a fear-based culture? Not just an underground, grimy sort of big city culture, or a big, densely populated. Is there a culture of fear embedded into the media community?"
I would say so, yeah.
Okay.
Not just in the media community, you get it from the tabloids and things like that. Even if I go down the pub, I've had recently someone in the pub tell me that they were going to shoot me for supporting a Labour government. It was, we do have these conflicts of interest that are going on over here that they're rubbing. You're constantly, and especially after elections, especially with the holiday seasons, things like that, you do get higher rates of problems for people with mental health issues.
All right. Okay. All right. I'll just change my analysis slightly. So if there is a kind of a fear-based culture, how do you see do you see, because I was going to say it's not as much as the United States, but it's good to see that they're advancing on this front. Then what do you see in terms of investment in a ninja theory type industry? Do you think the industry is going to balloon now? Do you think this is do you expect ninja theory companies to start popping up all over the UK to address these problems of fear-based?
They haven't begun popping up over the UK, but we are already seeing things like virtual Iraq doing well over in America. The University of, I think it's of Wellington, Virginia, as well, have also got a similar project going on. This is still very much in the research progress start, so it needs that time to start getting out, and it's more needs the information to start being shared across multiple platforms. If you go to the Insight Project's website, they're asking for collaborations and things like that. So it's more.
You mentioned as well. You mentioned PTSD, and PTSD comes from a lot of professions, not just the entertainment industry that you're involved in, but you're talking about war veterans, Iraq war veterans or Afghan war veterans. You're talking about police. You're talking about doctors. You're talking about a whole array of ambulance officers, a whole array of people in high stress positions and jobs. Do you see? Do you see that these occupations or could use this to address PTSD related issues, not just what do you say on that? On wider adoption?
I believe it could be widely adopted. So we do already have a lot of places starting to implicate in their businesses psychiatrists and counsellors to try and help with daily stresses. We're slowly trying to make it into law, but it's pushing it through is a bit difficult, especially when you've got smaller businesses which don't really get the same amount of attention. But if you have a digital version, it's a lot easier to buy a piece of equipment than it is to hire someone else to come in and do it. But then you've got the whole issue of, are you taking jobs away from people? So it is a bit of a balancing act. It's always going to be that way, especially with automation.
Benzai, in 2020, what do you think about in the United States? Do you think that there's a lot of occupations in the United States, big geography, lots of people? Would you like to see some of these technologies, these ninja theories, expanding across different occupations?
Oh yes. I mean, I think that this is something that's a common answer to concerns about the robot apocalypse, so to speak. This situation where we face, where 40% of existing jobs are likely to be automated out of existence in the next 15 years. People say, look at the landscape of available jobs at the beginning of the industrial era, but at the end of a more purely agrarian era. These were very limited set of jobs, only a handful of jobs that you could do, and people had no way of anticipating the sort of jobs that you or I might have been doing in the course of our own careers, and so forth. Many of those job descriptions did not exist. Many of those disciplines did not exist in any form at all. And so we should definitely be open to new disciplines that might be filling that void in the future. But the operative word there is void. There is going to be a period of years where there will be a void. And we have to be willing, as people who are political scientists and politicians, to be describing things that will fill that void, so that we don't have 10 or 15 years of absolute chaos.
Thomas, you mentioned they're writing it into law to expand this into different businesses and stuff. And I actually love this idea. I love this idea of flipping economics on its head, where you make a demand side through gaming. So gaming are already something that people will automatically just buy, usually, even if it's only a couple of 100,000 units. I mean, people will just buy a game because it's a game already by default. Whether they like it or not is another issue. But you mentioned that there's a law expansion of this potentially through law, and what I want to ask you is the NHS, okay, the National Health Service there in the UK. I mean, we're not going to talk about the financial times and the privatization of it and the utter destruction. Let's put all that aside for a second. Let's just pretend it's a really healthy, functioning machine, like it could potentially. It used to be, and it could be again, and we'll see what happens in the future. But the NHS, do you think they have a responsibility to sort of assist in the diversification of not just Ninja Theory, not just the Insight Project, but the idea of psychiatric help through these mechanisms and games, etc.?
Oh, as far as I know, the NHS don't do a lot research-wise. It's more implication of actually pushing, getting people seen and actually getting them back on their feet. But I do think that it needs that push to get those sort of technologies going forward. When I said it's getting written into law, I meant more across the getting counsellors and getting therapists within workplaces, especially for high-risk things. I mean, if you're on a building site, you don't want. I think I said it to John the other day, that if you're on a building site and you're using heavy machinery, you don't want that person having a breakdown whilst they're using a digger, especially when they're not getting paid and they might smash through windows, as I think that famous YouTube video saw. Now, if you've got a piece of technology that can be legislated and can be put out across the country, that could be something that is helping people's health-wise, why not write it into law that it has to go out? I think it does need that push sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, if you've got an MRI machine, you might have this device next door to the MRI machine. I don't see the difference. They're both tools and technologies in order to assist in human health. Ben Zion, what do you think? You've got a sort of social security system, medical system, Medicaid, Medicare thing going on over there. What do you think?
Yeah, I think that anything that tends to be using the fruits of digitalization to greater effect and tricking the marketplace into helping people a little bit better than it currently does, that's a good thing. I'm also very enchanted by this idea of a gamification in the gaming world, sort of a gamification inception. Gameception. That's something, some interesting things here at play here. But yes, this is something that we should be pursuing. This idea that this is not a thing for the marketplace. Marketplace is pretty imperfect measure, imperfect mechanism for rolling out products that are truly valuable to people. I'm reminded. I'm still sad that one of my favorite sitcoms of all time has just gone off the air, Silicon Valley. I'm reminded of an episode of Silicon Valley where the Thomas Middleditch character has left his company and he has had to take a job with an Instagram type company, and he's put in charge of the little rabbit ears that Instagram is famous for. In this case, it's a lot of little mustaches, but he's a fake mustache czar. And he quits the job in anger. He says, "This is not doing anything of value for anyone, me making a lot of little stupid mustaches." And I feel this way about the many facets of the marketplace. So anytime we can trick the marketplace into doing something a little bit better, more than happy to entertain such notions.
One problem this technology may actually have coming into play is getting someone to use it who's suffering a mental illness, especially if they've lost touch with reality or anything like that. Getting them to actually be able to use the technology and getting them to trust is very hard. So I actually personally escaped when I went into a mental hospital. I did actually escape from there at one point. And it took a lot to get me back to go in there. So you will still need psychiatrists, you still will need therapists and things like that to actually be able to help these people get there.
It's a well, actually, I want to say that. Yeah. Well, what about Thomas? What about preventative? The prevention side. Do you see any utilization for this technology to be preventative at all?
Yes, of course. So if you're able to map the entire brain and what exactly is causing the problems that this person is having, if someone starts to show the signs, we can then actually have a look, say, right, yep, you are starting to suffer from this specific illness. We can then begin to actually work for a treatment for you. The earlier you hit, the easier it is for someone to get out. The longer it's left, the more the brain has already started to think in these certain ways that they can't get out of.
Ben Zion, if there's a preventative measure, wouldn't there'd be a lot of happy, healthy school kids in the United States that there aren't right now because of tragic shootings. Preventative measures, not only for school children, which would be actually an easier way to analyze because well, you're at school and you have teachers and mental health professionals and their friends and their social unit to analyze this. But what do you say for preventative stuff, not just at school, but in general?
Oh, yes. Yes. This ability to see a problem coming just a little bit ahead of schedule. It's the difference between people having a relatively small issue on their hands and having some life-ending or life-altering catastrophe that they're dealing with, literally. This is a point that we've made many thousands of times on this program, or many dozens of times at least, about the value of a public health service that treats aging as a disease. That preventative quality is a cost-saving measure. And this is true in this related discipline as well. We've spoken at length on this subject. Even in the last episode, we talked about how in this rather different future that we face, some of these institutions will change rather substantively. And I think that it's important to think also about the ways that education might be changed by advanced algorithms, that this level of connectivity could really change, and this level of advanced technology could really change what we're doing in terms of education. It becomes a little bit less about a specific knowledge base and a little bit more about acculturation and value alignment. And that's an important part of what we're discussing here when we're talking about mental health interfaces of this more rudimentary kind being widely adopted.
What other issues, Thomas? What other technologies or issues outside of the gaming aspect a little bit technology's issues and theories to do with mental health. Are we not listening to or not contemplating on this in this conversation? Maybe neural implants. You mentioned neuroweapons. Taking a walk in nature. What are we not talking about?
So literally just actually talking to someone can actually be the one thing that helps save their life at the end of the day. A person who's suffering from mental illness will usually take their own life more likely than they would take someone else's. And it's very hard to help that person reconnect and actually get to a state where they can fluidly speak out and be able to actually understand what's going on in the conversation that they're having. So the only other technology I can think of that's currently out there which is doing wonders is the actual program that's happening to map the brain. So what they're doing is there is a room where they use metal copper piping to block out the Earth's magnetic field, and they can actually tell where each neuron is firing within the brain and map it once this person sits in this room, this object on their head, and it literally measures each and every little neuron firing. They can map it out, and they can then see where those neurons are firing. That is the one thing that is getting us closer to literally getting the brain interface technology going, getting mental health sorted in a lot of people. That's probably the most important one that we've got at the moment.
Do you recommend an expansion of funding into this technology, into these rooms, into this sort of analysis of the brain? Is that what you're saying?
I personally do think we need that, especially if we're looking at getting into a singularity where people want to download their brains into a piece of technology to live forever. How can you do that if you don't understand the brain fully? How can you map someone's brain if you don't understand that fully? It's something that we probably need to look into a hell of a lot more than we already are. As far as I know, I can only think of 2 companies, which I can't think of the names of at the moment, who are doing that. Ninja Theory's project, where they're actually looking at the different interfaces for gamification. Those are great for helping mental health problems, but they're not really getting the collaborations they need, such as I say, the Virginian college that's doing a project at the moment as well. I think it is Wellington. We need to get more connection between those companies and between gamers and between people who have had mental health problems and scientists. They just need to start communicating more and sharing more research, and that is the main thing that the Insight Project is looking into. Fantastic.
What did you have to say on that, Ben?
Oh no, I was going to say that just two weekends back, I was lucky enough to be invited to speak at the annual Newport Beach, California Super Longevity Holiday event. This little one-day conference. We did a little coverage of that also. And in the aftermath of that, the cocktail party that ensued, I was talking with Dr. Peter Voss, an incredible advanced algorithm researcher, more specific to developing natural language processing interfaces. And my friend, Dr. Jeremy Cohen, who I'm going to be seeing in just a few days up at PUI. And we had an interesting conversation about something that I think is a little bit lacking in some of these conversations generally, this idea of gamification and mental health interfaces. We don't focus quite nearly enough on the prospects of some more fully realized chatbot, for lack of a better word, interface. So in this conversation with Dr. Voss, we were talking about the prospect of grief bots, for example, a very fully realized sidekick app that would allow someone to have the the moral support that they need in a difficult time, for example, at the death of a loved one. This is often an experience where people going through any sort of life change, they don't have the support network that would be required to do well in that situation. And interfaces, as odd as it may seem, are on the verge of being able to fill in a lot of those gaps, and many more besides.
All right, Thomas. So building off what Ben's just opened up there, it might sound crude, but what do you think about comfort robots, the rise of the robots, humanoid robots, even sex robots? What do you think about this? Do you think this is going to be better for humanity, so that at least they'll have something to interact with and talk to on, or do you think this is not real human communication? It's not going to help at all. What do you say?
I think it helps with certain aspects such as depression, anxiety, things like that. There is one chatbot which I've seen which imitates your dead loved ones type of speech, and that's can help people get through a lot of these hard times and hard processes that you have to go through in general life. But when you've got something such as schizophrenia, psychosis, things like that, that wouldn't be enough to help them out. That's when they need to really, those are the people that really need to look inside themselves and really need to figure out what's going wrong in their life to actually push them in that direction. Very
interesting. What do you think about the other side of that, Ben? The androids, humanoid robots, the future, the sex bots, like what do you think about that other side? Not just the chat bots, but the more human interface, human interaction side. Do you think they're going to assist?
Well, I don't think that it's a very careful or insightful analysis of the near-term marketplace to say that we will have physical robots doing a lot of this. That's to assume that suddenly everyone has $4 million to spend on such.
Can I just interrupt you for a second and just say, for example, what about the elderly in Japan? How they're adopting robots to assist them in Japan? It's happening in Japan right now. What do you say?
Yes. There's quite a few uses of this in Japan, but those are not necessarily the kinds of robots like the ones that we saw in the demonstration from Boston Dynamics at Robotic Super Soldier. They're not, but they are still very useful nonetheless. That is an excellent point. We should point out that a large humanoid robot might not be that valuable of a property on the marketplace, but other applications of some high degree of similarity to those, but that would be more cost effective, they very well might. But that doesn't really mean that much, because we are on the verge of having cost-effective and nearly ubiquitous augmented reality, which completely circumvents the need for building this sort of substantial physical infrastructure in the form of robots. I can have a chatbot that has by all appearances, looks like whomever you like, Abraham Lincoln, my poor sainted mother, whomever it is that you want to talk to, and with the use of an augmented reality device, I could be having that for literally pennies on the dollar compared to building a robot of that kind. So that just seems to be the most likely of outcomes, unless there's an incredible acceleration in electrical engineering that I have not yet anticipated. So as to the socio-political impact, which is really more, I think, the thrust of your question, that is substantial. And there's a lot of people who, in most features, would be regarded as liberal-minded or broad-minded folks. For example, people who would call themselves feminists, who have written books. It's almost a cottage industry of writing books about how sex robots are going to destroy the human race. And they have some valid points. If you think that the function of the human race is to grow to ever larger and larger numbers into the tens of billions or ultimately trillions, then they have a valid point. I'm inclined to think that maybe we should be open to these things and allow automation to improve our lives in every way, and also maybe not necessarily think in terms of growing the actual physical human population to greater and greater number.
Thomas, Ben brings up a really good point about VR. Now, Ninja Theory has built a game which is a 1.0, a Stone Age version of this VR that we're talking about. What do you say to that? Do you think that the VR will be the answer to this? And will it create a problem where do you think it could advance problems where people who were healthy might not be so healthy because they'll live in dare I say it, a fantasy land, a type environment, and they'll come back out into reality?
Fantasyland is probably the best way of describing it, to be honest. So for me, when I had my personal experience, I would not have stepped into a machine without having someone around me who I trusted, which was quite rare around that time. To put a headset on and to step into a machine is quite difficult for someone who's going through a period of their life where they think, well, maybe I'm just being put into this machine as put into a temporary reality, and that will be my reality from now on, and then I have got no choice in the matter. So for stuff like psychosis, it may be a bit difficult, but for other things like social anxiety, it would really help out with that kind of mental illness. It all depends on the mental illness and the treatment for that mental illness itself. So social anxiety, if you've got one where, you've got a problem with having people around you all the time and feeling a bit claustrophobic in yourself, then that might be able to help you come up with a way of dealing with that, because they can put up virtual avatars around you, and you can then practice on your communication skills and the way that you hold yourself and things like that, and build off of the actual avatars themselves. And then begin to repair that sort of system. But as I say, for stuff like psychosis, it wouldn't help out. If you're looking at the robot side, again, psychosis, that wouldn't help out. Maybe for the more physical ailments like dementia or things like that, that might help. But for psychosis, that wouldn't help.
Yeah. But there are a vast array of mental disabilities, mental disorders, and psychosis is how. I'll start with this. How common is psychosis, and where is it more common? Is it more common in Western countries, or where is it more common, and how common is it? And is it the worst one we have to deal with, or is depression a bigger problem, or what's the biggest threat?
Well, you have to look at the history of psychosis itself, really, to sort of answer for that. So if you say how common is it, well, every tribe back in the Stone Age used to have a shaman. And a lot of people put that down to a psychotic episode that person went through. And usually that person then helped other people who were going through problems in that sort of transitional period to help them through. They became almost like a religious figure within their society, because they'd seen some stuff.
A little too much psilocybin or something, yeah.
Yeah, exactly that. So it depends on, as I say, it seems a lot more common in certain areas of poverty, or certain areas where there's stress going on. So for me, again, I was in central London where they were knocking down buildings around me because they wanted to build the Olympics. So I wasn't in the most stable conditions at the time. And for a lot of people that I've met, again, they've had similar situations where they're not in the most stable place financially, or stress-wise. They're just it's built up, and then they finally snapped. It all depends on the placement in society more than Western culture or other cultures.
You've unearthed the big one. I mean, the big one is the conditions, the starting conditions of all of this. So in your case, you're talking about insecure housing being a starting condition, high stress levels at your occupation, obviously being a club manager, a bad environment, where not only do you have high stress demands on you because of your work environment, but also because of the culture of that environment, because you're being seduced or pushed into behaving like the clients almost on a daily basis, and you've probably being interacting with your other people who the secrets compound, the little stories they compound, the stress it compounds, the late nights, the sleep deprivation. It's almost torturous after a while. It wears and tears in your brain. The starting conditions. This is where Ben Zion is going to fix a lot of things in the United States, but the starting conditions, the socioeconomic starting conditions. So you mentioned insecure housing, bad occupation. What can we do to address some of these conditions? Should there be a health warning on being a club manager? What should like a cigarette packet? Like, what should we do?
Well, it's not just club managers who get it. Unfortunately, It can be across the board. Someone can suddenly become mentally ill. It depends on many factors in that person's life. What the best thing we can do to prevent something like that is to understand that it does happen, to keep an eye on other people. If they start to seem like they're going to go through something like that, then to help them actually seek help themselves. If someone is struggling in a way, it's a social aspect of it, of that person has been too strong for too long, and they've literally got to a point where they can't hold it back anymore. Their emotions are not the ones that they're actually showing off. And to fix that problem it's very hard in today's society, especially since we are part of a capitalist society where money is power. We're all striving to outdo each other with that current system we have, and it puts a lot of stress on the people who haven't made it in that aspect, where they begin to start to fall back and start to suffer. I've been quite lucky because obviously I had the NHS to fall back on, but if I was somewhere like in America, the mental health services over there, I don't think would have been that kind of my wallet, and I probably wouldn't have understood money to begin with anyway, whilst I was during that phase of not understanding what was going on around me and perception. So you would have a lot of people falling through the gaps there. I did end up on the street until I was found and went back out, went to the NHS. So I am a product. I am a success story of a more socialized system when it comes to that. But you're not going to get that across the spectrum, the whole spectrum, unfortunately.
And we're glad you are a success story, and thanks so much for coming on Detonation to tell us your story, being so brave. It's incredibly brave what you're doing, and enlightening and educating people as well. Ben Zion, 2020. Policy, that's you're big on policy. It's all about policy, right? So some of these problems, insecure housing, occupational problems, bad occupations, no sleep disorders, where you get locked into this routine. If you don't participate, you're gonna lose your house, or you're gonna be behind in your rent, or behind in your bills, or whatever's going on. What are we talking about? Bernie Sanders is a huge movement in the United States. There's no laughing matter. Trump, he took the other side. There was a lot of crossover between the Trump and Bernie people because they both felt disenfranchised by the system. You're getting mocked here by two foreigners about your National Health Service in the mental health field and in the actual physical field. Because of the poor. I mean, you spend more than the rest of the world. You spend 18% of your GDP, billions and billions and billions of dollars on health, and yet the outcomes are bad. What we're talking about initial conditions for psychiatric problems. Ben Zion, 2020.
Yes. Earlier in this talk, we alluded to the problem of the Reagan era, Reaganomics, and a certain kind of series of privatization pushes that resulted in what we term broadly hate radio. This is a serious problem in the United States, and it's not a problem that's been resolved to any real degree. In the interest of answering this question, I'd like to call back something you referred to just a few minutes ago. You were referring to mental health interfaces generally leading to something like a fantasy land, and that is a very serious concern. Thinking about that hate radio phenomenon, for example, in this landscape of advanced algorithms and interfaces, we could have this kind of hyperreality that caters to those people who are regularly engaged with this hate radio phenomenon. This hyperreality could lead to its unhealthy reality to an even higher degree in this specific subset of the population, and any number of people engaging with that sort of thing is quite an unhealthy phenomenon. It's in thinking about this potential landscape of augmented reality and advanced algorithms and interfaces of this kind, it's important to think about the most likely outcome. It's not only going to be good things. It's a conversation where I've been critical of the United States Transhumanist Party to a small degree in the way that we often frame discussions of artificial personhood. For example, artificial personhood is an exciting long-term prospect and one that we should be happy about. But in the near term, the kinds of artificial personhood phenomena that we've seen are basically corporate-owned chatbots, and those corporate-owned chatbots becoming more powerful. A Cambridge Analytica on acid phenomenon is not necessarily a healthy thing for a civil society. Similarly, some of these hyper-reality effects that we would see in this context, those things need to be addressed. There's a very real prospect that the human race will not survive the 21st century. There are people, even very smart people, who look at the tools that we have at our disposal and will soon have at our disposal and think that we will be rather like the cat in the old adage, curiosity killed the cat. And I hope that's not the case. But it is reason why we need to have a very, very careful analysis of these type of powerful tools and how they are used, and why we have to be very critical of people. A lot of the people, for example, who engage in hate radio, they don't approach you by saying, I am a hateful human being, I am consumed with derision for working people and my fellow North Americans. They talk about things that seem to make sense, like maybe about how Jesus lives in their heart, or things like this. So we have to have a little bit better bullshit detector for analyzing these larger effects if we do hope to survive the 21st century. And it's why I've not been too bashful about talking about something that Andrew Yang is also not terribly bashful in talking about, something like a social credit system, something that will incentivize, rather than punish people, incentivize less provincial attitudes, less non-useful cultural properties, and encourage people to embrace, stay away from these kind of hate radio and hyper reality effects in the coming day.
Well, it's not really a joke. It sounds like we're going on and on about it, but I mean, Donald Trump, his first pit stop on his campaign was straight to Alex Jones, and then he played Rush Limbaugh as the moderate middleman. So when you've got Alex Jones as the back end, and you've got Rush Limbaugh of all people being the moderate middleman, and Glenn Beck probably out of the picture somewhere, retired on a beach in Omaha with Warren Buffett. I don't know what they're doing, but it's not really like it's an actual talking point. So you've got one person endorsing a mentally, so it's a real issue, right? And I'm not sure about the mechanisms on the left, but it's definitely true on the right. And this Fantasyland notion, a lot of it is derived through this quote-unquote hate radio. They do live in a fantasy land. You tune in because you don't like your life, and so you tune in to divulge yourself in an unreality, in a disenfranchised reality, which turns into actual political action that you get screwed over by someone like Roger Stone, who will then sell you books endlessly and make fun of you as he pretends to be your friend. The U.S. Transhumanist-Party is engaged in rational discourse and science and technology, and that's what I enjoy about it. I mean, we're not here to we're here to create policy solutions and solutions to these issues, and that's why I thank you, Thomas, for coming on and enlightening us about ninja theory, because we actually want to create solutions to these issues. We want to create solutions so Americans can wake up in the morning and actually have a better existence than living in a pseudo-fascistic state. And the problem with America, America being a mentally ill person, is that they have so much potential to do so much good. You're talking about a $20 trillion economy. You're talking about nuclear weapons. You're talking about they stand on the edge of the greatest innovations of human history that we've ever seen. And I thank the UK for engaging us into the steam engine, the industrial age. I mean, that was a fantastic innovation, getting that water out of that mine. That engaged the whole world on this mechanism, and now that burden has fallen on America.
Since then,
huh?
We have had other things since then. It's not just the steam.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was what set it all off, right? You rocked the world when you did that. Then you invented the computer. I mean, that's even better. I mean, come on. But no, you've done a lot, and the UK has been this big engine of innovation in itself. But now the burden is falling on America to not be mentally ill. That's the issue, and we actually need to engage in that process and fix that.
The UK is having the same problem at the moment. So we are going through, in my eyes personally, almost like a Stockholm syndrome, a mass Stockholm syndrome of where we're keeping with the same government, even though of the failings that have happened already. Obviously, I am more left-leaning towards the political parties, but there's certain aspects which have been quite threatening in trying to get governments to be re-elected. There's a lot of things which I've noticed, such as repetitive three-word processes which are used in hypnotism, Trump's handshake as well. I don't know if you've seen, it's quite a aggressive handshake. Again, that's another technique which is used in hypnotism. These are things that are going on quite regularly in trying to manipulate people along those lines. It's not just neuroweapons in the sense of machines. It is in the sense of the psychological aspects of it. And the machine that's getting used the most is the propaganda machine of the internet, of the TV, and of things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And there is a mechanism of control that's been set up, and I agree. And the UK went from, remember, we used to call the UK the compassionate society, right? You guys, we used to call it the compassionate society, and now it's gone. It's done a flip almost to the nasty society. It's become nardish. We're going back to nardish, nasty, brutish, and short almost. Even though their technology is advancing rapidly, and it shouldn't be like this. So there are challenges, and it's going to have to work itself out. But there are solutions to these problems. But it's always the French. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I'm going to blame them, but I'm going to blame the French.
We always blame them, don't worry. Yeah.
No, but anyway, thank you. Thank you. Well, is there anything else you'd like to talk about to do with Hellblade, Ninja Theory, or the Insight Project, or any of these mental health issues that we haven't quite touched, Thomas or Carol? Carol, thank you so much.
So I would definitely suggest, if you are someone who is either in the gaming industry, in the neurological science industry, or if you're in just the general technologies industries, please get in contact, see where you can help and collaborate. They are doing it as an almost a scientific information sharing platform. So just get over there and try and help out and try and help these progress these technologies.
Are you in contact with any of the people involved in the project yourself?
I have. I do know Tam and Melina, but I've not been able to get in contact with them recently. Now that I know that they've released a new game, I can understand why. And yeah, they've also been doing things in like GQ magazine and such. So trying to get into contact with them has been quite difficult, but I will keep trying.
Well, I'd suggest that that we're friends of them on this show here. So if you ever get in contact with them again, tell them that we're happy to support and we'd love to have them on the show to talk about this. I'm sure Benzoin, you'd like that, wouldn't you?
Oh yes, yes. As I said at the top of the show, this DARPA or Google Labs scale undertaking in the form of the Insight Project. It's a laudable undertaking and one that we want to find ways to promote. Ninja Theory, by all of our standards, perhaps sitting here, is a big company, but in terms of the scale of such an undertaking is relatively small operation. And so we should find ways to see that they are able to finish this incredible project in the form of the Insight Project.
I would love to interview them. I would love to support them. Get them on the show. Let's talk to them. Come on yourself, Thomas. That would be really good. As someone, as an inspiring person, and you've inspired people today. You've inspired me. I'm sure you've inspired Ben. You've inspired the audience. You're a survivor. You're an inspirer. You're an educator, and I thank you very much for that. And we wish you all the best in your own journey, in your own recovery, and your continued education. It's fantastic, and this Ninja Theory Insight Project. I think this is opening doorways. Even just if it's ideation, it's opening doorways to new ways to improve mental health that flips this is the correct economic incentive that you want. It's something that consumers can consume. It's enjoyable. It's fun. There's a demand side. There's a supply side. It innovates all the time. I mean, because these video games are not easy to produce. These video games are complex to produce, and they create a lot. There's a lot of energy on the other side of the development side of that. And so I think this is sort of the roundhouse kick, that's really needed in this field of mental health, because this mental health field is a minefield. It's a very tough one. And I mean, not everybody trusts psychiatrists. Everybody trusts psychologists. You yourself, Thomas, said your trust goes down. I mean, so sometimes putting people in a white coat in some sort of big room, I'd want to run away as well. If I've got voices in my head telling me that the government's going to put me in a lab coat under some conspiracy, and then it actually happens. I mean, I'd want to run away as well. So, not all people respond to these sorts of mechanisms in the way that the government would like, or that would be best for them, to not harm others and to improve their health. But also, on the education side, it's good for people who don't suffer from these to understand what's going on, to understand better what's happening inside these people's heads, so that they don't exacerbate the issue, and that they can actually take things, like these "Are you okay?" or Beyond Blue, or these other mental health institutions and organizations more seriously. so that they don't mock them, or if they're in political power, or if they're in financial power when they're looking to donate, they've got a big company and they're looking to throw money at something, or if they're a political person, they can better understand that these are good institutions and organizations to fund. So this is a great education experience. Thank you very much, Thomas. Take it away, Thomas. What do you got to say?
No, so yeah, it's oh, you put me on the spot there. So,
all right. Well, we're gonna wrap up.
Something I'd like to say.
Yeah, go Ben.
You go first, Ben. Go first. That's what I was expecting.
What I would really like to say is, if you've taken something like something more than a passing interest in this conversation about mental health interfaces and about using advanced systems of various kinds to improve our world, don't think of this merely as some future project that you might someday be entwined in, because there are already many useful things that you can be doing. There are applications for dementia patients. For example, there's one called Endurance for people most particularly suffering from Alzheimer's. There's another app for people who have insomnia, advanced chatbots of many kinds. So my point is not that maybe you have insomnia or that you are demented, but rather that do not be this sort of person who is only thinking about far future thought experiments. Be a person who is using others and encouraging others to be early adopters, and not someone who is in a trance of uncanny valley effects, and a person who pretends to be interested in using these things, but in fact remains for all practical purposes very uncomfortable with them. These kinds of chatbots, these kind of interfaces that we've discussed, many of these things already exist in some form, and you can be playing with them, and you can be sharing these things with other people, and you can be encouraging people that have problems to use these kinds of solutions, and I would really hope that you will.
Thomas, thank you. Yeah.
Sorry. Building trust with people who are going through that is a major step. The problem with things like psychosis is someone might have a thing called hyper-awareness. So they are hyper-aware of everything that's going around them. So anything that they can make a connection with, they will make a connection with. So as you said, someone with a lab coat coming up and doing things like that, when someone's been telling you, when you think the government's after you, it's very hard to get that person to then step the way that they need to. Having the person who's there that they trust and they care about and they know cares for them can really help make that difference and helping push forward.
Great. And conversation, as you said, conversation, talk to your friends, talk to your family, talk to them, say hi, how are you? That's great. All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Very good. Very good show.
To give a quick shout out to the very good commenters. Oh, we finished. We're finished.
No, we're going. Keep going. Commenters. Yep.
I just wanted to give a nice shout out to our very fine commenters today, in the form of Alex Black, who has made had some interesting insights that we didn't address at great length, but we did have some allusion to. And also another old friend of the show has turned up, Jason Mallory, and he's also suggested an augmented reality usage for a device in his possession, a quote-unquote Sacramento soapbox, something that could be of use to our upcoming Guinness record that we are setting for longest period of continuous usage for augmented reality. That's coming up in Q1. Very directly relates to this question of new interfaces. And thank you for that kind offer, and I hope to continue that conversation, Jason. Looking forward to talking to all of you about these things. If you have a moment, do please go to penzion2020.com. Also go to transhumanist-party.org/membership. If you haven't signed up and become a member of the Transhumanist Party, do it now. And please continue to be looking for a lot of exciting announcements coming from the Transhumanist Party and from our friends here at Dead Nation. Thank you again, Steve.
Yeah, and if you could give the video a like, it always helps us. Thank you very much. All right, that's Benzion 2020 and Thomas Carroll, the very brave, inspiring man there from a rainy UK. All right, thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah, awfully rainy.